From studios at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, this is Fourth and State. In this edition, despite all the controversies of the past year, Wisconsin is in a better place because of Scott Walker's policies, says Steve Malanga of the Manhattan Institute. You'll hear why he believes that today on Fourth and State. I'm David Haynes, editorial page editor of the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and I'm joined today on Fourth and State with Steve Malanga, who's a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. In a recent article you wrote, you said that in comparing Illinois with Wisconsin and how the two states have handled their fiscal challenges, you said that Illinois has emerged as a poster child for fiscal irresponsibility. Now, explain that to me and explain how the two states have taken on their fiscal challenges here in the last few years.
Yeah, well, Illinois essentially has not taken on its fiscal challenge. They've allowed their unpaid bills. Now, they're just not paying their doctors who work for their Medicaid program. They're not paying vendors. They're not paying their bills. So they've allowed their unpaid bills to go to $9 billion. In addition to that, they haven't really done any significant pension reform, and they also have what's estimated as $54 billion in promises they've made to retirees for health care, to their own workers for health care and retirement, that they haven't bothered to fund. On top of all that, they raised taxes by several $billion last year. The money was supposed to go to actually fix their budget problems and begin paying down their debt. Instead, because they haven't done pension reform, because they haven't done health care reform in the state, retiree health care reform, most of the money is actually being eaten up just by pension costs. So it's really a fiscal train wreck there. They not only have a budget deficit, they have several $billion in unpaid bills that they're going to have to pay off in some way or another. And they really can't, they're not even making adequate pension payments. They've essentially borrowed about $15 billion since 2003 and put that money in their pension fund because they couldn't afford to actually make contributions to the pension fund. That's a pretty bad situation.
Yeah. Contrast that with what you see going on in Wisconsin, at least in the last year or so.
Well, I mean, I think there are a number of things. First of all, I do see municipalities in Wisconsin, sort of aggressively moving to do things like save on health care costs. The new pension law requiring greater contributions from workers is obviously a relief to the municipalities. You don't have a lot of long-term pension unfunded liabilities, although you borrowed money and you do have to pay off that borrowing to do that. But the new law requiring greater contributions from workers means that essentially the state contribution won't continue growing the way it is in some other places, creating future problems in addition to states that have unfunded past liabilities. You got these future problems. So I mean, and you don't owe $9 billion. I mean, that's a pretty big.
So Governor Walker was in Illinois yesterday. Of course, he's running now in a recall election and was speaking before a business group there, touting his record. Governor Quinn, Pat Quinn of Illinois, countered that. All right, fine, but Governor Walker's efforts haven't really done much for job creation, and he compared the two states on that basis. Is that a fair comparison?
Well, I think in the time frame he used, it's not a fair comparison. I've been covering state and local government for a very long time, and the job numbers from month to month change dramatically, and because they're not really based on they're based on surveys and the estimates. And so what's really fair when you're looking at job numbers is to take an entire year, for instance, compare a year to another year. So he just basically looked at the last 3 or 4 months or 5 months, but he ignored the past 2 months. It's an absurd comparison. And here's the thing. The real issue with job creation, I believe, increasingly is going to become, for states and cities, how fiscally stable are you? And in fact, it's ironic that Quinn would say that because a couple of weeks ago at a forum, Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel said, when you look at these unfunded liabilities we have, when you look at how people are worried how we're going to have to pay this off with higher taxes, if we don't do tax reform, we're never going to be able to attract another business to Illinois. He hit the nail on the head. He sounded the warning. So, I mean, Quinn ought to be paying attention to that, I think.
Is there also an issue, and you've talked about the issue of crowding out. Can you talk about what you mean by that?
Yes. People are kind of getting into what I call an either-or debate about these pension systems. They're saying, well, yeah, I know there are a lot of unfunded liabilities, but when are they going to go bankrupt? And how come they haven't gone bankrupt? And if they haven't gone bankrupt yet, is it really a problem?
Right.
And
can't we just push it off? Into
yeah,
the future?
exactly.
Yeah.
And the problem is this, is that all around the country, and California is one good example, New York State's another good example, but all around the country, these unfunded liabilities are forcing pension funds to send bigger and bigger bills to governments, including state and local governments. Those bigger bills are appearing on budgets and crowding out other services, other spending. And so in California you have, for instance, I'll give you a very good example, you have a city by the name of Stockton, which is essentially insolvent, announced a couple of weeks ago that it was suspending its bond payments. They are insolvent because their pension and healthcare costs have been growing so fast. What they've had to do is cut basic services. They've cut 25% of their police department. Finally, they said, we can't cut basic services anymore. We're just going to stop paying some of our debts and start negotiating. So that crowding out is significant. And it's not so much the insolvency that matters, but you have hundreds of thousands of municipalities around America that essentially are having to cut basic services because of these growing costs. And even if they never go insolvent, it's not a great deal for taxpayers.
So these problems have been building for years. Why are we hearing so much about it now?
Well, because, I mean, there are a couple of reasons. First of all, we've gone through an unprecedented fiscal downturn where in some places tax collections have stayed below peak levels for 3 or 4 years. We haven't seen that before. In addition, the stock market hasn't gone anywhere, I mean, essentially for more than a decade. And most of these pension systems were banking on an average of 8% return a year. If you take 8%, you know, go online and calculate it in one of those online calculators, 8% compounded annually, that's a fantastic amount of money that they don't have. I mean, a fantastic amount of money. In addition to that, a lot of these employee perks were granted during the 80s and 90s, and people are now starting to retire with them. And so they're coming due. You put all those things together, and I hate to use a cliche, but it's like a fiscal tsunami in some places.
So Governor Walker took one approach in limiting bargaining rights for public workers. And other governors have tried different things. Certainly Christie in New Jersey is an example, Daniels in Indiana. But now Governor Walker is in the midst of a very contentious recall. On a national level, how important is it for the Walker idea that he win that recall?
Well, you know, the whole budget repair bill battle attracted a lot of national attention. And I think the unions have kind of wanted to make it into a national issue. I think that it's being diminished as a national issue, and I'll tell you for a couple of reasons. Number one is other states, they can't ignore their problems. So they're going to have to do something to fix their problems anyway, because I said this is not going away. You look at the deterioration in Illinois and California, it's not going away. So you're going to have to do something. Secondly, there was this widespread idea that if it succeeded in Wisconsin, that it would spread to the entire country. That was never going to happen. You're not going to get the end of collective bargaining in these really, in places like California. You're not going to get it in New York. On the other hand,
political environments are very different.
Political environments are totally different. Yeah. It happened in a few swing states. There are many states, there are 12 states that don't even have collective bargaining yet. So those were the states that would have been most likely to do it, but they already don't have it. So I don't really think it has quite the impact that we thought, except of course that it's almost kind of now become a signature movement for the union, a signature moment for the union movement.
Yeah, almost a cause célèbre in that sense. Yeah. Well, Steve Malanga, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us once again on Fourth and State.